Yo, what is up, guys? It's Freddy Knows Ball back with another video, and
Ball knowledge.
guys, we don't need an intro today. Let's get right into it. The ball knowledge for today's rhetorical synthesis lesson is don't read the notes. I know it sounds crazy, guys, but half of the text on the screen when you have a rhetorical synthesis question is absolutely irrelevant for the majority of the questions in rhetorical synthesis. I know it sounds crazy, guys, but on rhetorical synthesis, you typically don't need to read the notes unless it's for a really hard question or you need to find some sort of evidence, which we'll talk about. For the most part, just keep that in mind, guys. You don't need to read the notes when you're looking at rhetorical synthesis questions. The strategy that I have for rhetorical synthesis is step 1, read the question. Step 2, highlight what the question is asking for. If you're not big on highlighting or annotating, just make sure that you understand what the question is asking. Rhetorical synthesis is all about that detail that it asks you inside of the question. And we'll go over plenty of practice today, guys. I'm sure this will be drilled into your head once we have it done. And of course, after you highlight or truly understand what the question is asking for, you go ahead and read the answer choices in order to find what best answers the question. So before we get into the practice, I want to make 2 side notes. Not necessarily outliers, but just kind of things that you should keep in mind when you're doing rhetorical synthesis questions. If the question says that the audience is familiar with something, that means the answer choice does not need to define it. If the question says that the audience is unfamiliar, that means the correct answer choice does have to define it. If a question asks you to summarize a study, which we'll go over one like this, that doesn't mean they just want the steps they used to get to the study. They also want who conducted it, when was it conducted, and the results of the study too. So whichever choice best explains that, that's your correct answer. Sometimes the rhetorical synthesis question will ask you to make a generalization or make and support a generalization. And so for those questions, you really just have to understand a generalization is really just a broad statement, kind of like a summary. And if it asks you to support the generalization, that just means you have to have evidence from the notes. Without further ado, let's hop into our first practice question. And you guys are going to see how insane this ball knowledge is. Now, what's the first step? Read the question. All right, let's do it together. The student wants to present the study to an audience already familiar with environmental DNA. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Okay, so you see that second sentence there, guys? That second sentence will always be there, and that's how you know it's rhetorical synthesis. If that second sentence is there and you see notes on the left side of the screen, you've identified that it's rhetorical synthesis. Now let's look at the command and what they actually want us to answer in this question. The student wants to present the study to an audience already familiar with environmental DNA. That's what I'm highlighting, from present to DNA, okay? That's what we're looking for in the answer choices. When we read the answer, we have to ask, does it present the study and does it not define environmental DNA? Because if the audience is already familiar, you're not supposed to define it. So let's reach answer choice A. Sarah's researchers analyzed eDNA in water samples from the Florida Everglades for evidence of invasive constrictor snakes, which are difficult to observe. So in this question, it says the researchers analyzed eDNA, so it is presenting the study, and it doesn't define eDNA, which means it aligns with our answer. So I like answer A. Let's make sure the other 3 are incorrect though. B says, an analysis of eDNA can detect the presence of invasive species that are difficult to observe, such as constrictor snakes. So since the question is asking about presenting the study, you kind of do have to know what the study is in order to solve this. And that's kind of the outlier that I was talking about, right? If it wants you to summarize a study or present a study, you kind of have to know what the study is. So let me skim through the notes real quick and find what the study actually is. All right, so the study is essentially saying that Sarah's research team analyzed the eDNA in water samples from the Everglades to detect invasive constrictor snake species in the area. And that's basically A, almost word for word. So that's why I like A so much, but that's also why I dislike B, because it doesn't really go over that at all. It talks about the constrictor snakes. It doesn't talk about where it was at, which is the Florida Everglades. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's look at C. Researchers found Burmese python eDNA, or environmental DNA, and boom, I see that they defined eDNA. And since the audience is already familiar, we're not supposed to do that, so I can cross off C immediately. D, Sarah's researchers analyzed environmental DNA, parentheses eDNA, that is DNA from the cellular materials released by organisms. So it's like they made sure the audience was familiar with eDNA, and then they also defined it. So that's definitely not right. And so that's why A is our correct answer, because it presents the study accurately and it does not define eDNA. All right, now here's the next question. The first step in our process is to read the question. The student wants to describe the rocking chair to an audience unfamiliar with Sam. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information? What is our command? What are we answering? Describe the rocking chair to an audience unfamiliar with Sam. Once we find that, we can jump to the answer choices. We're not looking for a study or trying to support anything, so I don't really need to skim the notes at all. We can just jump straight into the answers. So A says, with its sleek contoured armrests and seat, the rocking chair in Boston's museum is just one piece of furniture created by American woodworker Sam Maloof. So check it out. The audience is unfamiliar with Sam Maloof, so we need to give him some sort of context, right? We need to give some sort of context that helps us understand who Sam Maloof is. And here we say he's an American woodworker, so that is valid. Also, it talks about the rocking chair, and it describes the rocking chair in great detail. So I like A. Let's make sure the other three are wrong. B says, Sam was born in 1916 and died in 2009, and during his life he made a chair you can see if you visit the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So yes, it does give some background on Sam, and it does kind of mention the chair. It doesn't even mention that it's a rocking chair though, and also it's not in great detail, so A is just a much stronger answer there. C says, furniture designer Sam Maloof, so there's the unfamiliar, so that works, was a recipient of one of the John and Catherine Foundation's Genius Grants. Where's the rocking chair? We don't even talk about the rocking chair there, so that can't be right. D says, the rocking chair is made from walnut and it has been shaped such that its armrests and seat are sleek and contoured. That's a great description of the rocking chair, but the audience is unfamiliar with Sam, and Sam isn't even mentioned, so that can't be right. So we know A is our correct answer there. Real quick guys, Future Freddy here. I just wanted to say thank you for making it this far in the video. If you guys want to be shouted out in the next video, go down into the comment section below and type skip the notes, all right? I'll see you guys in the next one. Hopefully you guys get a shout out. Thank you so much for the support. I've been editing like crazy, trying to get these videos out for you guys, so just wanted to say thank you. Back to the video. All right, let's move on to this one. This one's a little bit harder, so let's read it. The student wants to present the primary aim of the research study. Now, I see that it's presenting the primary aim of the research study. I'm gonna try to find what that is by skimming through the notes real quick. So this is another one where skimming through the notes can be beneficial. You probably could solve it without looking at the notes, but since this is a hard question and, we're trying to get a 1600, we don't want to have any room for error. So let's see what the primary aim is here. So after skimming through the notes, I can see this research team wanted to better understand the mechanics behind the bird nests, right? And so I feel like that's the primary aim. So let's look at which answer aligns with that. A says, B's team wanted to better understand the mechanics behind bird nests' uniquely flexible yet cohesive structural properties. I mean, that's perfect. I love that answer choice. Let's make sure the other three are wrong. The researchers used laboratory models that simulated the arrangement of flexible sticks and analyzed the points where sticks touched one another. Now, this is more of the step-by-step, right? This is more of the methodology of the study, but that's not what the question asks. The student wants to present the primary aim of the study. The aim of the study is more like, what is the goal, right? And the goal is to better understand the mechanics behind the bird nests. So we know B is wrong. C says, after analyzing the points where the sticks touched, the researchers found that the structures became stiffer when pressure was applied. So that's kind of almost like an observation for what was happening during the study, but it's definitely not the primary aim, so we can cross C out. D says, as analyzed by B's team, bird nests are uniquely flexible yet cohesive. That's not talking about the aim of the study. That's talking about the results, but it's not showing what they're trying to do. They're trying to understand the mechanics behind the bird nest. That is the primary aim. And so that's why A is once again correct. All right, this question is also a hard difficulty. Let's go ahead and read it. The student wants to introduce Catherine's book to an audience already familiar with the Atlantic Monthly. All right, so the reason that this question I think is tricky is because there's two things here that have Atlantic Monthly in them, okay? You would get this from reading the answer choices, so you don't actually need to read the notes. It could help you understand that sooner, but you can understand that the Atlantic Monthly is a magazine, and the book Faraway Woman and the Atlantic Monthly is a book, right? So they're two different things. It's just the magazine, the name of it is inside the book, which makes it kind of confusing. As long as you understand magazine, Atlantic Monthly, book, Faraway Woman and the Atlantic Monthly, you'll be fine. A says, Catherine's Faraway Woman and the Atlantic Monthly discusses female authors whose autobiographies appeared in the magazine in the early 1900s. Okay, I like that. It's talking about the book, and it briefly mentions the magazine without defining it, which is what we want because the audience is already familiar with the magazine. B says, a magazine called the Atlantic Monthly, referred to in Catherine's book title, was first published in 1857. So that's giving too much context to the magazine, which is not what we want since the audience is already familiar. C says, Faraway Woman and the Atlantic Monthly features contributors to the Atlantic Monthly, first published in 1980. Wow. First published in 1857 as a magazine focusing on politics, art, and literature. So that's giving context to the magazine, which is not what we want. We can cross out C. D says, as author discussed by Catherine is Juanita, whose autobiography appeared in the Atlantic Monthly. That's not talking about the book at all. So D is incorrect. And that just confirms that our answer is A once again. All right, so this is actually one of the hardest questions I found in College Board for rhetorical synthesis. So if you can confidently answer this, I'm pretty confident that you will be able to get all the rhetorical synthesis questions right on the actual SAT or PSAT. So the question says the student wants to summarize the study. That's all we need to know. All we need to do, summarize the study. Now, since I don't know what the study is, I'm going to skim the text to try to figure it out. The only reason this question is seen as so difficult is because most people think, okay, we're trying to summarize the study. That must mean like the steps that were taken up to the study, but not including the results. But that's actually not what College Board wants. College Board actually wants who conducted the study, when it was conducted, and the results, all when they want you to summarize the study. So let's see which answer choice does that best. A says for a 2019 study, so there's when, researchers, so that's who, collected data on the attempts to land at cliffside nesting sites. So yeah, that's part of the step by step, but we don't get the results in there. So that's not everything we're looking for. I like it I like that answer choice. If all the other ones are weaker, I would probably choose that, but we have to keep reading. Emily Shepard and her colleagues wanted to know the extent to which wind affected auk's success in landing at cliffside nesting sites, so they conducted a study. All right, this one talks about who conducted. It doesn't talk about when, but it also talks about like the aim of the study, you know, like a question we did previously, but unfortunately it also doesn't talk about the results, and College Board really wants the results when you're summarizing the study. So I would try to prioritize that more. So I'm not really liking B. C says, knowing that auks often need multiple attempts to land at their cliffside nesting sites, Emily Shepard studied the bird's success rate, which was only around 20% in some conditions. Okay, I like this answer. It talks about who conducted. It doesn't say when. It says some of the results, and it talks a little bit about the aim, right? Let's look at D though. D says, Emily Shepard's 2019 study of auk's success in landing at cliffside nesting sites showed that as wind conditions intensified, the bird's success rate decreased. Okay, this is the strongest answer choice because it does a better job at summarizing the results. You can see C said that they had a 20% landing rate in some conditions. This is more all encapsulated, right? It's talking about as conditions intensified, birds' landing rate decreased. That's more general, right? So the result is better. Also, it talks about who conducted the study and when it was conducted. So that fits the most of the criteria, and that's why for this question, D is the strongest answer and is therefore correct. Now I got one more for you guys. This one is making and supporting a generalization, okay? So I'm not reading the notes here because the generalization is about the orbits of comets. It tells us what it's about. So oh my gosh. So I don't need to read the notes to understand this. Now, we need to make sure that it makes a generalization and supports it. And remember, supporting a generalization just means you need evidence from the notes. So let's look at A. Astronomers estimate that the number of comets orbiting the sun is in the billions. Okay, that's not really a generalization about the orbits of comets. That's just like saying, oh yeah, the comets orbiting the sun is in the billions. That's not talking about the orbit of the comets, you know? And so yes, it is supported, but that's not the generalization that we're looking for. B says, like Uranus, Jupiter, and Mars, billions of comets orbit the sun. So that's kind of a generalization. It's not really about the orbits of comets. It does talk about the comets orbiting, but there's definitely not anything to support the generalization. So B's out. C says, one example of a comet is 81P/Wild. All right, I'm just going to stop reading right there. We don't need an example of a comet. Where's the generalization? That's not a generalization. So C is out. D says, a comet's orbit around the sun may change over time. That is a generalization right there about the orbits of comets. We want a generalization about the orbits of comets, and D says a comet's orbit may change over time. If that isn't the clearest generalization, I don't know what is, okay? And to make it even better, it supports that generalization with something from the notes, talking about the orbit of comet 81P/Wild once lay between the orbits of Uranus and Jupiter, but is now positioned between those of Jupiter and Mars. So I can understand why A or C might be kind of tempting. B doesn't really have a support, so I would try to better understand what supporting the generalization means if you picked B. I would try to better understand what supporting a generalization is if you were thinking that B was correct. But yeah, C does just give an example and then doesn't really make a generalization. So that's why that's incorrect. And A does make a generalization, but it's not directly tied to the orbits of the comets. It talks about, oh yeah, all these comets are orbiting and there's a lot of them, but it doesn't say like the orbiting comets change over time like D does. And so yeah, if you guys struggle with any of these, feel free to watch the video back and feel free to leave any questions in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you guys. But that's all I have for you guys on rhetorical synthesis. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.